The sun, a fiery orange ball, was just peeking over the shimmering surface of Lakeview Estates, painting the water in hues of gold and rose. Usually, at this hour, the lake would be alive with the quiet hum of electric trolling motors and the gentle plop of fishing lines hitting the water. Today, however, an eerie stillness hung in the air, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the frantic, hushed whispers of the residents gathered by the boat dock. Panic, a cold and unsettling feeling, was slowly spreading through the community like ripples across a pond. Nothing. Not a single bite, Deborah, barked Roger, his face red from frustration, his expensive fishing rod held uselessly in his hand. I've been out here since before dawn, just like yesterday, and the day before. It's like all the fish just vanished. Brenda Patterson, the self-appointed queen of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association, stood stiffly, her arms crossed over her chest, a permanent frown etched into her face. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair seemed to bristle with irritation. Nonsense, Roger. Fish don't just vanish. This is a well-stocked lake. Perhaps your technique is lacking. Roger sputtered, my technique? I've won the Lakeview Fishing Derby 3 years in a row. This isn't me, Brenda. Something is seriously wrong. Nobody is catching anything. The lake is dead. A murmur of agreement rippled through the small crowd. Old man Fitzwilliam, who claimed to have fished every lake in 5 states, nodded gravely. He's right, Brenda. It's unnatural. Like someone just pulled the plug on the whole ecosystem. I've never seen anything like it. Brenda's eyes narrowed, searching the placid surface of the lake as if it might confess its secrets. Her brow furrowed deeper, a tiny crack appearing in her usually impenetrable armor of certainty. The prized fishing rights, the very heart of the community's recreational life, seemed to have simply evaporated. And the worst part? She had no earthly idea why. They were completely in the dark, baffled by the mysterious emptiness of their beloved lake. Little did she, or any of them, know that this baffling, unsettling quiet on the water was all because of a simple metal chain, a man who loved his boat, and a kindness repaid with spite. What would they do when they finally connected the dots? And how could something so invisible cause such a monumental problem for an entire community? Alex Miller had always loved the water. It called to him, a vast, calm expanse that promised peace and adventure. Growing up near the coast, he'd spent countless hours skimming waves on his small boat, fishing with his dad, or simply drifting and watching the clouds. When his job as a software developer became more flexible, allowing him to work from anywhere, he knew exactly what he needed, a house on a lake. That's how he found Lakeview Estates, a picture-perfect community tucked away in a quiet corner of the state. From the moment he first drove through the grand stone entrance, Alex felt a sense of belonging. The streets curved gently, lined with mature oak trees that dappled the sunlight on neatly manicured lawns. Kids rode bikes, neighbors waved from their porches, and in the distance, the shimmering expanse of a large, beautiful lake beckoned. The real selling point, though, was the communal boat launch. It wasn't just a simple ramp. It was a well-maintained facility with plenty of parking, a small dock for loading, and even a little picnic area. It promised endless days of fishing, leisurely cruises, and the serene quiet that only water can offer. Alex, in his late 30s, easygoing and with a smile for everyone, imagined his small but sturdy fishing boat, the Serenity now, gliding across those calm waters. He saw himself spending quiet mornings casting lines, inviting friends for relaxed sunset cruises, and maybe even teaching the neighborhood kids how to bait a hook. He bought the house without a second thought, his heart swelling with hope for this new, peaceful chapter. Moving in was a whirlwind of boxes and new faces. Alex made sure to introduce himself to everyone he met. He was the kind of person who always tried to be helpful, believing that kindness was like a boomerang, it always came back to you. When his elderly neighbor, Jake Thompson, a retired history teacher with a twinkle in his eye, struggled with a leaky faucet, Alex didn't hesitate to grab his toolkit. It took him less than an hour, but Jake was immensely grateful, insisting on bringing over a plate of his famous chocolate chip cookies. Across the street, Mrs. Schmidt, a sweet lady who baked like an angel, dropped off a welcome pie. Alex, remembering his mom's lessons, washed her pie pan sparkling clean and, knowing she'd appreciate it, filled it with a batch of his own surprisingly decent oatmeal raisin cookies before returning it. He just genuinely liked people and wanted to be a good neighbor. The Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association, or HOA, was a big part of life here. They managed the common areas, set the rules, and generally kept the community running smoothly. Alex read through the thick binder of rules they provided, noting the guidelines for landscaping, trash collection, and, of course, the boat launch. He understood the need for rules. They kept things fair and organized. The boat launch had specific regulations. You needed a key fob to open the gate, you had to sign a logbook, and there were strict hours for launch and retrieval. No overnight parking of trailers, keep the area clean, and no excessive noise. All perfectly reasonable, Alex thought. He was meticulous by nature, always wanting to follow the rules and contribute positively to any group he was a part of. He even volunteered for a community cleanup day at the boat launch area, picking up stray fishing lines and wiping down the picnic tables. He wanted to make a good impression and be a model resident. It wasn't long before he encountered Brenda Patterson. She was a prominent figure in the HOA, serving as the head of the Architectural Review Committee, which meant she had a say in everything from paint colors to porch decorations. More often than not, she seemed to speak for the entire board, her voice carrying an air of absolute authority. Alex's first direct interaction with her was when he was unloading some gardening supplies from his truck. She approached him, her posture ramrod straight, and informed him, with a polite but firm tone, that his truck was parked slightly over the yellow line in his driveway. Alex apologized, though he hadn't even noticed, and immediately corrected it. Another time, he received a sternly worded note in his mailbox about his recycling bin being put out 5 minutes too early on collection day. Little things, really. Annoying, but he chalked it up to Brenda being overly detail-oriented, someone who probably just cared deeply about maintaining order. He even tried to strike up a friendly conversation with her once, complimenting the pristine condition of the community's flowerbeds, hoping to find common ground. Brenda simply offered a curt, "Thank you, Mr. Miller. We expect residents to uphold our standards," before walking away. It wasn't exactly warm, but Alex was a glass-half-full kind of guy. He thought, well, at least she's dedicated. He just wanted to enjoy his new home and his boat. He didn't want any trouble, and he certainly didn't think he was the kind of person to stir it up. He was wrong. The day Alex planned his first big boating trip was perfect. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze promised ideal conditions on the lake. He'd spent the previous evening meticulously preparing the Serenity now, checking the engine, fueling up, and organizing his tackle box. He packed a cooler with sandwiches, cold drinks, and a thermos of hot coffee. He even threw in a few extra snacks, just in case he bumped into Jake or Mrs. Schmidt and they wanted to join him for a bit. His excitement was a physical hum beneath his skin as he hitched the boat trailer to his truck, the engine purring softly. He double-checked his key fob for the boat launch gate, made sure he had his logbook to sign in, and with a deep breath of the fresh morning air, he set off, dreaming of the smooth ride and the thrill of a good catch. As he approached the familiar path leading to the boat launch, his smile widened. He could already picture backing the trailer down, the satisfying splash as the boat hit the water. But as he rounded the final bend, his truck slowed, and the smile faded, replaced by a deep furrow in his brow. A heavy, gleaming silver chain, much newer and thicker than anything he'd seen before, was stretched tightly across the entire entrance to the launch area. It was secured by a padlock that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. Tied to the middle of the chain, flapping gently in the breeze, was a stark, red-lettered sign, no access. Unauthorized use prohibited. Alex slammed on his brakes. What in the world? He checked his rearview mirror, then his key fob. He pulled out the HOA rulebook from his glove compartment. Everything was in order. He had permission, he followed all the steps. Just as confusion began to morph into frustration, a familiar figure emerged from behind the small storage shed near the launch. It was Brenda Patterson, dressed in a crisp white blouse and perfectly pressed khaki shorts, looking as if she had been waiting. She walked towards him slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips, her eyes cold and unyielding. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with an unnatural sweetness that made Alex's skin crawl. "Lovely day for boating, isn't it?" "Brenda, what's going on?" Alex asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though his heart was beginning to pound with a mix of disbelief and growing anger. "Why is the launch chained off?" "I have my key, I signed up." Brenda stopped a few feet from his truck, her arms crossing over her chest in her signature pose. Her smirk widened slightly. "Oh, Mr. Miller. There have been developments." She paused for dramatic effect, clearly enjoying the moment. "Effective immediately, your access to the Lakeview Estates boat launch has been revoked." Alex stared at her, dumbfounded. "Revoked? What are you talking about?" "Why?" "For numerous infractions, Mr. Miller." "Numerous infractions," she stated, waving a vague hand as if conjuring a list of imaginary offenses. "A noise complaint, a perceived violation of the trailer parking rule, and general disregard for the serenity of our community. The board has voted." "A noise complaint? When? My boat is quiet. And I've always parked my trailer exactly where it's supposed to be." Alex protested, his voice rising now. This was absurd. He'd been nothing but respectful. "This isn't fair. You can't just do this." Brenda's eyes hardened, and the false sweetness vanished, replaced by a steely glare. "The board's decision is final, Mr. Miller. You are no longer permitted to use this amenity. Good day." With that, she turned on her heel, her back perfectly straight, and walked away, disappearing behind the shed as silently as she had appeared. Alex stood there, alone, the Serenity now, hitched uselessly behind him, his dream of a perfect day on the water shattered into a million pieces. He looked from the impenetrable, locked chain to the empty spot where Brenda had stood, a cold, hard knot tightening in his stomach. His usual calm dissolved, replaced by a simmering fury. This couldn't be happening. Not after all the effort, all the kindness he'd offered. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Deep down, he knew this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a declaration of war. He wasn't going to let Brenda Patterson get away with this. Not after she'd taken away his peace. He would find a way to fight back, and she would regret the day she ever blocked his boat access. The next morning, the anger Alex felt had not faded. In fact, it had solidified into a cold, determined resolve. Brenda Patterson's smug face and dismissive wave haunted his thoughts. He tried calling the HOA office, but the phone just rang and rang. He left a message, a carefully worded one, requesting an immediate meeting with the board to discuss the unfair revocation of his boat access. He felt a desperate need to understand the supposed infractions she had mentioned. He hadn't violated any rules, not truly. The noise complaint was likely from that one time he'd tested his boat's horn, a quick, friendly toot to signal to Jake that he was leaving the dock, not a prolonged blast. As for the trailer parking, he always made sure his tires were perfectly within the painted lines of his driveway, just as the HOA rules stipulated. He even had a photo on his phone, taken just days ago, showing his truck and trailer perfectly aligned. Alex spent the day pacing his living room, rereading the HOA rulebook, searching for any loophole, any forgotten clause that might explain Brenda's actions. He found nothing that supported her vague accusations. The rules were clear, and he had followed them. He even called Jake Thompson, who listened patiently to Alex's furious retelling of the event. "Brenda Patterson, huh?" Jake sighed over the phone. "She's a piece of work, Alex. Been here for ages, and she practically runs the HOA herself. Nobody really dares to challenge her. She makes life difficult for anyone who doesn't fall in line with her idea of perfection. But she can't just make up rules," Alex exclaimed, his voice tight with frustration. "She said the board voted. Is that even true?" Jake chuckled humorlessly. "Hard to say, son. The HOA board meetings are pretty much just Brenda talking and everyone else nodding. Most folks just want to avoid trouble. It's easier to go along with her than to fight." "Well, I'm not going along with it," Alex stated firmly. "I bought this house for lake access. This is my property right. She can't just take it away because she feels like it." Jake advised Alex to remain calm, to document everything, and to try to speak with other board members if possible. "Just don't give her any more ammunition, Alex. She'll use anything against you." Alex hung up feeling a mix of validation and renewed determination. He decided to prepare a formal letter, detailing his grievances and demanding a clear explanation and reversal of the decision. He gathered all his documents, his property deed, showing his right to community amenities, a copy of the HOA rules, with relevant sections highlighted, and even the time-stamped photo of his perfectly parked trailer. He wanted to be ready for whatever came next. The next afternoon, Alex tried a different approach. He decided to visit Mrs. Schmidt, remembering her kindness and gentle nature. He brought her a fresh batch of chocolate chip cookies, Jake's recipe, which he'd asked for. Mrs. Schmidt was delighted to see him and invited him in for tea. After some pleasantries, Alex hesitantly brought up the issue with Brenda and the boat launch. Mrs. Schmidt's kind face softened with sympathy. "Oh, dear Alex. I heard about that. Brenda can be challenging. She has a very strong sense of what is proper, you see." She stirred her tea, her gaze drifting towards the window. "She's been on the HOA board for years. Ever since her husband passed, I think she just poured all her energy into the community rules. She means well, in her own way, but sometimes her zeal, well, it gets the better of her." Alex listened, trying to understand. But revoking access without any real reason? It just seems so unfair. Mrs. Schmidt nodded slowly. "It is, dear. And I know you're a good man, Alex. You're always so kind and helpful. Remember when you helped young Sarah down the street get her cat out of that tree last month? Most people wouldn't bother." Alex had forgotten about that, just a natural instinct to help a distraught child. Mrs. Schmidt's words, though, made him feel a little better. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for the principle of fairness. "I heard her talking about you at the community potluck the other week, Mrs. Schmidt continued, lowering her voice. "She said you were too independent and didn't respect the established hierarchy. I think she just likes to be in control, and you, being new and all, perhaps didn't quite fit into her expectations." Alex felt a surge of indignation. So, it wasn't about rules at all. It was about control. Brenda didn't like that he was a self-sufficient, friendly new neighbor who hadn't immediately bowed down to her authority. This realization, while infuriating, also clarified his path. He wouldn't just fight for his boat access, he would stand up for everyone in the community who felt stifled by Brenda's heavy hand. He thanked Mrs. Schmidt for her honesty and her cookies, leaving her house with a heavier heart but a clearer head. He knew now this was more than just a misunderstanding. It was a power struggle. A few days later, Alex received a terse, unsigned email from the HOA secretary, informing him that his appeal would be heard at the next monthly HOA board meeting, 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks. It felt like an eternity. He couldn't use his boat, his main reason for moving here. He tried driving to a nearby public launch, but it was overcrowded, expensive, and miles away. It just wasn't the same. The lake in his backyard sat there, beautiful and mocking, its waters now forbidden to him. Alex decided to channel his frustration into something productive. He focused on his work, trying to distract himself. He also began to learn more about HOA laws in the state. He discovered that homeowners had specific rights, and HOAs couldn't just arbitrarily revoke access to common amenities without proper cause and due process. This knowledge empowered him. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just to reclaim his boat access, but to ensure that what happened to him wouldn't happen to anyone else in Lakeview Estates. He spent hours researching, poring over legal documents, determined to build an airtight case. He even started a small, discreet online forum for Lakeview Estates residents, inviting neighbors to share their experiences with the HOA, anonymously if they preferred. He wanted to gather evidence, stories of other unfair dealings, to show the true extent of Brenda's control. He called it Lakeview Community Voice. He invited only those he trusted, like Jake and Mrs. Schmidt, hoping they would spread the word carefully. But his quiet research and hopeful online forum were soon overshadowed by a far more aggressive escalation. One morning, as Alex was leaving for groceries, he noticed a small, bright orange sticker placed squarely on the side of his "Serenity Now" boat trailer. His heart sank. It wasn't a friendly note. It was an official-looking sticker, with a stark message: violation. Vehicle to be towed in 48 hours. Beneath it, a series of codes, indecipherable to him, and a small, almost invisible HOA logo. Alex felt a cold wave wash over him. His trailer was parked perfectly in his driveway, nowhere near the street. It wasn't blocking anything. It wasn't unsightly. This was a clear act of malice. He quickly checked his HOA rulebook again, frantically flipping through pages. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, about a boat trailer parked in a driveway being a violation, as long as it wasn't obstructing traffic or unsightly, neither of which applied to his neat, well-kept trailer. This was a new low. Brenda wasn't just blocking his access, she was threatening to seize his property. The boat, his pride and joy, was now marked for removal. He knew, instinctively, that this was Brenda's next move to push him out, to make him give up. He stood there, staring at the offensive orange sticker, the bright morning sun suddenly feeling cold and harsh. The battle, he realized with a chilling certainty, had just turned into a war. The orange violation sticker plastered on Alex's boat trailer felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an act of aggression, a clear message from Brenda that she wouldn't stop until he was completely miserable. He immediately took a picture of the sticker with his phone, documenting the exact date and time. Then, with trembling hands, he carefully peeled it off, the sticky residue leaving a faint mark on the smooth metal. He wasn't going to let that ugly orange mark sit there, mocking him. His immediate thought was to call Jake, but he decided against it. He didn't want to burden his kind neighbor with every single one of Brenda's petty attacks. Instead, Alex took a deep breath and started doing more research. This time, he focused specifically on HOA rules regarding vehicle towing and property seizure. He spent hours online, reading about homeowner rights and the legal limits of an HOA's power. He learned that most states had specific laws designed to protect homeowners from overly aggressive HOAs. To tow a vehicle, an HOA usually needed to provide clear, written notice of the specific violation, a reasonable opportunity to correct it, and often, an appeal process. Simply slapping a sticker on a trailer in a driveway with no prior warning was almost certainly illegal. He also found out that threatening to tow a personal boat trailer, especially when it was parked legally on private property within the community, was a severe overreach of power. Alex felt a surge of cold anger, but also a growing sense of confidence. He wasn't helpless. He had the law on his side. He carefully drafted another letter to the HOA, this one even more formal than the last. He referenced the relevant state laws, cited the absence of any rule prohibiting his trailer in his driveway, and demanded an immediate retraction of the towing threat. He included copies of his property deed, photos of his trailer, and a timeline of Brenda's escalating actions. He sent it by certified mail, ensuring he had proof it was received. He was building his case, piece by careful piece. To relieve some of his stress, Alex decided to go for a long walk around Lakeview Estates. He needed to clear his head, to remember why he'd moved to this beautiful place in the first place. As he strolled past manicured gardens and children playing in their yards, he tried to remind himself that Brenda Patterson was just one person. Most of the community was welcoming and friendly. He waved to a couple tending their roses, smiled at a dog walker, and felt a tiny flicker of hope return. During his walk, he decided to swing by the community bulletin board near the main clubhouse. He noticed a few new flyers. One was for a bake sale, another for a neighborhood watch meeting. And then, his eyes landed on a large, brightly colored poster. It announced the annual Lakeview Estates Fishing Derby, set to take place in just a few weeks. The poster featured a grinning cartoon fish wearing a tiny crown and proclaimed prizes for the biggest catch, the most fish caught, and even a special youth prize. A wave of sadness washed over Alex. How could he participate without access to the boat launch? The derby was usually the highlight of the summer for many residents, and without his boat, he felt completely left out. As he was looking at the poster, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Mr. Henderson, a quiet man who lived a few houses down and was known for his impressive vegetable garden. Mr. Henderson was carrying a fishing rod and a small cooler. "Morning, Alex, Mr. Henderson said with a nod, his eyes lingering on the fishing derby poster. "Good day for fishing, though it hasn't been great lately." "No, I guess not," Alex replied, thinking of the empty lake comments he'd heard. He decided to take a chance. "You know, Mr. Henderson, I was wondering if you'd heard anything about my boat access being revoked? And now they've put a towing sticker on my trailer." Mr. Henderson's usually calm face tightened. He looked around cautiously, then leaned in slightly. "I did hear something, Alex. From my wife, mostly. She heard Brenda talking. Said you were being difficult. But I didn't think she'd actually go so far as to block your boat." He shook his head slowly. "Brenda's got a bit of a reputation, you know. She really thinks she runs the show." "But the towing?" Alex pressed, showing him the photo of the sticker on his phone. "That feels like harassment." Mr. Henderson's eyes widened. "Goodness, that's going too far. You're parked perfectly on your own property. There's no rule against that. She's definitely overstepping." He paused, looking at Alex with a thoughtful expression. "Listen, Alex, you seem like a good fella. I don't know all the ins and outs, but if you need any help, just ask. Brenda needs to be put in her place." This unexpected show of support from a quiet neighbor lifted Alex's spirits immensely. It wasn't just him. Others saw what Brenda was doing. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That means a lot." "Don't mention it," Mr. Henderson said. He then gestured towards the fishing derby poster. "You planning on joining the derby this year?" Alex hesitated. "I'd love to, but, well, you know." Mr. Henderson frowned. "That's a shame. You've got a nice boat." "Well, I'm off to try my luck. Though I'm not holding my breath for any big catches." He walked away, heading towards the lake, his shoulders slumped slightly. As Alex watched him go, an idea, a tiny, mischievous seed, began to sprout in his mind. The fishing derby. The lake. Brenda's obsession with control. A subtle smile touched his lips. He wasn't going to just sit around and wait for the HOA meeting. He would find a way to make Brenda understand what it felt like to have something taken away unjustly. He thought about the fish, or rather, the lack of them that Mr. Henderson and Roger had mentioned. What if he could subtly interfere with the fishing in the lake without actually harming any of the fish? He wouldn't hurt any living creature. That was against everything he believed in. But what if he could make the act of fishing itself impossible, or at least, incredibly frustrating? He spent the rest of the day researching the lake's ecosystem, looking at the kinds of fish that lived there and their feeding habits. He learned about fish behavior, how they reacted to certain sounds, smells, and light. He wasn't looking to kill them or move them, he was looking to make them unreachable. He wanted to create a situation where the fishermen would go out, cast their lines, and come up empty, day after day, without understanding why. It would be frustrating, yes, but harmless to the fish. And it would be a direct, though hidden, consequence of Brenda's actions. The next morning, Alex started putting his plan into motion. He couldn't use the main boat launch, but he remembered a small, overgrown path on the far side of his property that led directly to a secluded, marshy part of the lake. It wasn't suitable for launching his large boat and trailer, but it was perfect for a kayak or a small, inflatable raft. He owned a sturdy, two-person inflatable raft, the kind used for leisurely floats, not serious fishing. It would be difficult, almost a secret mission, but possible. He'd have to carry his gear down, inflate the raft, and then paddle out under the cover of early morning darkness or late evening twilight. His plan involved a clever, completely harmless, but deeply annoying strategy. He researched the specific feeding patterns of the most common fish in Lakeview estates. He learned about their preferred depths, their typical foraging times, and what sounds or scents might deter them without causing actual harm. He spent a small fortune online, ordering specific types of non-toxic, biodegradable pellets designed to attract fish but not meant for actual consumption. He also purchased several small, discreet, solar-powered underwater lights that emitted a soft, pulsing glow, known to disorient certain fish species without hurting them. His goal wasn't to empty the lake, but to make the fish move away from the usual fishing spots, to make them shy away from bait, to simply make them uninterested in being caught. It was a subtle, almost invisible form of protest. He would bait a specific area far from the fishing derby zone, an area that would draw the fish away from the common fishing grounds. He would create a safe zone for the fish, an area where they would feel no pressure to bite, where they could just relax and ignore the hooks of the hopeful anglers. That evening, under the cloak of darkness, Alex dragged his inflatable raft down the hidden path, past thorny bushes and damp earth, until he reached the water's edge. He inflated it quietly, the rhythmic hiss of the air pump sounding deafening in the quiet night. He loaded his supplies. Small containers of the special fish pellets, a few of the solar lights, and a simple paddle. He was a man on a mission, fueled by injustice and a growing determination to show Brenda Patterson that her actions had consequences. As he pushed off from the muddy bank, paddling silently into the inky blackness of the lake, he felt a thrilling mix of nervousness and anticipation. He knew what he was doing was extreme, unconventional, and perhaps a little crazy. But it was harmless. And it was his way of fighting back. He paddled for what felt like forever, past the familiar boat launch, now dark and chained, and deeper into the lake's expanse, heading for the most popular fishing spots. When he reached the prime areas, he began his work. He carefully dropped the biodegradable pellets into the water, creating a wide, appealing scent trail that would draw the fish away from the usual bait. He strategically placed the small, pulsing underwater lights at various depths, designed to subtly agitate the fish, making them less likely to bite hooks. He moved methodically, a phantom on the water, ensuring his presence went unnoticed. He wasn't harming the fish, just making them elusive. He was taking away the opportunity for others to catch them. He worked until the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the sky, his muscles aching, but his spirit alight with a quiet triumph. As he paddled back to his hidden spot, the first fishing boats began to appear on the horizon, their occupants unaware of the invisible, harmless chaos Alex had just sowed beneath the surface. He carefully deflated the raft, hid his gear, and trekked back to his house, exhausted but resolute. He waited, his heart thrumming with anticipation, for the inevitable complaints to begin. He knew it wouldn't be long until the first frustrated shouts echoed across the lake. He was ready for the next phase of his silent war, and he knew that Brenda, the self-proclaimed ruler of Lakeview Estates, was about to face a problem she never saw coming. The quiet frustration began subtly, like a whisper on the wind, before growing into a chorus of complaints. The day after Alex's secret nighttime mission, the lake, usually a hive of fishing activity, seemed strangely subdued. Anglers would launch their boats with hopeful smiles, only to return hours later with grimaces and empty coolers. Roger, the avid fisherman who had confronted Brenda earlier, was among the first to voice his bewilderment at the community bulletin board. "It's happening again," he declared to anyone who would listen, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "Not a single bite. I tried every lure, every spot. It's like the fish are on vacation." Other fishermen, one by one, shared similar stories. "I thought it was just me," muttered Mike, a burly man known for his patience on the water. "But my son, Billy, even he couldn't catch anything today. And that kid can usually sniff out a fish from a mile away." Brenda Patterson, who always seemed to be everywhere, heard the grumbling. She initially dismissed it as typical fisherman's exaggeration. "Perhaps the weather isn't right, or the moon phase," she suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. She didn't like anything disrupting the perfect facade of Lakeview Estates, and unhappy residents were a disruption. She certainly didn't want the upcoming fishing derby, one of her pet projects, to be a flop. As the days turned into a week, the whispers turned into worried conversations. The lake, once a source of pride and recreation, was becoming a mystery. The common areas near the boat launch grew quieter, the usual camaraderie replaced by a sense of bafflement. Fishermen started avoiding the lake altogether, their rods gathering dust in their garages. Alex, observing from a distance, felt a grim satisfaction. His subtle, harmless sabotage was working exactly as planned. He continued his nightly trips, paddling out in his inflatable raft, quietly replenishing the fish pellets and adjusting the underwater lights. He was consistent, meticulous, and completely invisible. During this time, Alex received a formal-looking letter from the HOA. His heart pounded as he opened it, expecting a response to his detailed appeal or, worse, another threat about his boat. Instead, it was a generic notice about the upcoming annual community picnic and the fishing derby. There was no mention of his letters, no acknowledgement of his revoked access or the towing threat. It was as if Brenda had simply chosen to ignore his existence, hoping he would just disappear. This blatant disregard only fueled his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was showing everyone, silently, what true disregard for residents looked like. Meanwhile, Brenda was becoming increasingly agitated by the growing complaints about the fish. Her perfectly controlled world was wobbling. Residents were starting to look to her for answers, and she had none. The fishing derby, her pride and joy, was looming, and the thought of it being a total failure was unbearable. She called an emergency HOA meeting, not for Alex's appeal, but specifically to discuss the fish problem. "This is unacceptable," she declared, pacing in front of the small group of weary board members. "Residents are complaining. The derby is next week. We cannot have a derby if there are no fish." Mr. Peterson, an older board member who usually just nodded along, finally spoke up. "Brenda, we've had experts check the water quality. It's fine. There's no pollution. The fish are there, we just can't seem to catch them." "Well, then we need a fishing expert. Someone to explain this anomaly," Brenda demanded, completely flustered. She hated not having an answer, not being in control. This looks bad for the HOA. This looks bad for Lakeview Estates. The desperate search for a solution to the fish problem became Brenda's new obsession. She hired a local fishing guide, Mr. Barnes, to assess the situation. Mr. Barnes spent 2 days on the lake, casting lines, using different baits, and trying every trick in his book. He returned to the HOA office looking utterly perplexed. "I've never seen anything like it," he admitted to Brenda and the other board members. "The fish are definitely in the lake. My sonar picks them up. They just aren't biting. It's like they've all gone on a hunger strike. They're avoiding the bait completely, almost as if they're being fed something else, or something is making them shy." He scratched his head. "Or maybe something is making them feel too comfortable elsewhere, so they don't need to bite." Brenda dismissed his suggestions about something else feeding them. Nonsense. Who would be feeding the fish? That's ridiculous. This is an enigma. We must solve it before the Derby. While Brenda was losing her mind over the phantom fish, Alex was busy on another front. His Lakeview Community Voice online forum was slowly gaining traction. Jake Thompson and Mrs. Schmidt had subtly spread the word, and now, a few other anonymous residents had joined, cautiously sharing their own stories of unfair treatment by the HOA under Brenda's leadership. Small things. A fine for leaving trash cans out too long, a denied request for a minor fence repair, a passive-aggressive letter about children playing too loudly. Each story, though small on its own, painted a larger picture of Brenda's rigid control and arbitrary enforcement. Alex made sure the forum was a safe space for people to share their experiences without fear of retaliation. He encouraged empathy among the members, reminding them that they were all neighbors, united by a common frustration. He collected each anonymous complaint, organizing them into a powerful dossier for his upcoming HOA meeting. He knew these stories, combined with his legal research, would be crucial. The day before the fishing derby, the tension in Lakeview Estates was palpable. The lake remained stubbornly empty of caught fish, a silent protest to the upcoming event. Brenda was furious, her face perpetually pinched with stress. She called Mr. Barnes again, practically begging him to find a solution. He suggested trying to chum the waters with massive amounts of bait, a desperate attempt to entice the fish. Brenda readily agreed, authorizing a significant amount of HOA funds for the effort. She was desperate to save her derby and, more importantly, her reputation. That evening, as dusk settled over the lake, Alex once again launched his inflatable raft from his hidden spot. He watched as HOA volunteers, under Brenda's watchful eye, dumped large buckets of chum into the designated derby area, hoping to lure the elusive fish. Alex waited until they were gone, then quietly paddled to the other side of the lake, far from the derby zone, where he deployed even more of his special, harmless fish pellets. He was essentially out-chumming the HOA, drawing the fish away from the intended fishing grounds with an even more appealing, non-threatening food source. He placed extra underwater lights there, creating a safe, comfortable zone where the fish could gather without a single hook threatening them. He wanted the derby to be a spectacular failure, a clear, undeniable message to Brenda about the consequences of her actions. He returned home exhausted, but a fierce determination burned within him. He was ready for the derby, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that Brenda was about to experience the deepest humiliation of her reign as HOA queen. The next morning, the sun rose on the day of the annual Lakeview Estates Fishing Derby. The air was thick with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, tables were set up for registration, and the smell of breakfast burritos wafted from the food trucks. Children, clutching small fishing rods, darted excitedly around the boat launch area. Brenda Patterson, dressed in a bright polo shirt and a wide-brimmed hat, bustled around, directing volunteers, her smile tight and artificial. She had to put on a brave face, but beneath the surface, she was a coiled spring of anxiety. All the residents were counting on this event, and all the fish, she hoped, were finally cooperating. The derby began with a blast of an air horn. Boats, launched from the public ramp since the HOA one was restricted for the event, fanned out across the lake. Lines were cast, children squealed with delight, and the sounds of laughter filled the air. For the first hour, everything seemed normal, the typical derby buzz. But then, a subtle shift began. The laughter died down. The calls of "fish on" were conspicuously absent. People started looking at each other, then at their empty buckets. An hour turned into 2, then 3. The enthusiasm slowly drained from the participants. The children grew bored and restless. The adults started to grumble, their earlier optimism replaced by confusion and frustration. The professional fishing guide, Mr. Barnes, who had been hired to oversee the derby, came back to shore looking defeated. "Still nothing, Brenda," he announced, shaking his head. "Not a single fish. It's truly baffling. We've used every trick, all the chum. It's like the lake is completely empty, even though the sonar shows fish down there. They just won't bite." Brenda's face, usually so composed, began to crumple. The tight smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. The biggest event of the year, her pride and joy, was an utter catastrophe. The residents were looking at her, not with anger, but with a bewildered disappointment that was far worse. The murmurs grew louder, questioning looks were exchanged. How could a whole lake full of fish just disappear? What was going on? Brenda felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, but she had no idea why. She didn't know that the answer was quietly walking among the crowd, observing her downfall, a man whose boat access she had unjustly blocked. She looked out at the vast, silent lake, a chilling realization slowly dawning on her. The fishing derby was a total bust, and she had no one to blame, and no explanation to offer, but she knew this was a disaster for her standing in the community. She was losing control, and the worst part was, she couldn't see the hand that was gently, harmlessly, pushing her world apart. Brenda Patterson stood amidst the wreckage of the fishing derby, her face ashen, the tight smile she usually wore completely gone. The residents, once enthusiastic and hopeful, now milled about with expressions of disappointment and confusion. The air, which had been thick with anticipation, was now heavy with bewilderment. Brenda felt the weight of their silent questions, their unspoken accusations. How could the centerpiece of Lakeview Estates, the annual fishing derby, turn into such a spectacular failure? She had no answers. Her carefully constructed image as the competent, in-charge HOA leader was cracking, visibly, for everyone to see. The whispers grew louder. "Where are all the fish?" someone mumbled. "This has never happened before," another added, shaking his head. Brenda could feel their eyes on her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly powerless. She desperately wanted to lash out, to blame someone, anyone, but there was no visible culprit. The lake was just empty of fish willing to be caught. It was a phantom menace, intangible and infuriating. She even tried calling Mr. Barnes, the fishing guide, for more answers, but he just repeated his earlier baffled statements, leaving her even more frustrated. Alex, meanwhile, watched the drama unfold from a discreet distance. He saw Brenda's panicked expressions, the deflated shoulders of the derby participants, and the general air of bewilderment that had settled over the community. A quiet satisfaction bloomed in his chest. His harmless plan was working beyond his wildest expectations. He hadn't harmed a single fish, hadn't broken any real rules of the community, but he had managed to create a situation that completely disrupted Brenda's control and exposed her limitations. This was his answer to her unjust actions, a mirror reflecting her own arbitrary power back at her. The fallout from the disastrous derby was swift and profound. The very next day, the Lakeview Estates online forum, Lakeview Community Voice, exploded with new activity. Residents, emboldened by the HOA's public failure, began to shed their anonymity. Mr. Henderson chimed in, recalling Brenda's past overreaches. Mrs. Schmidt, though still gentle, subtly supported the concerns. The initial trickle of complaints turned into a flood. People felt cheated, not just by the absence of fish, but by a deeper sense of unfairness that the Derby debacle had brought to the surface. "This fish situation is just the latest," one brave resident, Sarah Jenkins, posted. "Remember when the HOA fined me for having pink flamingo decorations on my lawn? It was just for my daughter's birthday." Brenda said they were not in keeping with community aesthetics. Another person, Mark Davis, added, "Or when she insisted I cut down my perfectly healthy oak tree because it might eventually block her sunlight. This isn't about rules, it's about her control." Alex, reading through the comments, felt a surge of pride and solidarity. He hadn't just fought for himself, he had, unwittingly, given a voice to a community tired of being dictated to. He had been compiling these stories, and now, seeing them shared openly, felt incredibly validating. He realized his individual fight was becoming a collective stand. He decided it was time to move from quiet sabotage to open confrontation, but armed with the support of his neighbors and the law. He prepared diligently for the upcoming HOA meeting, the one where his appeal for boat access was finally scheduled to be heard. He organized all his documents. The certified mail receipts for his letters, the photo of the illegal towing sticker, his legal research on HOA overreach, and now, printouts of the anonymous and named complaints from the Lakeview Community Voice Forum. He wanted to present an irrefutable case, not just for his boat access, but for a change in the way the HOA was managed. He felt a newfound confidence, no longer just a single homeowner against a powerful board, but a representative of a community demanding fairness. Brenda, completely unaware of Alex's secret online forum and the groundswell of discontent brewing, was too consumed with the fish problem. She saw the mounting resident frustration as a threat to her authority, but she believed it was all due to the mysterious absence of fish, not her own actions. She scheduled another emergency board meeting, this time specifically to address the public outcry and figure out how to save face. She even considered spending more HOA funds to restock the lake, though Mr. Barnes, the fishing expert, had advised against it, saying there was no evidence the fish had gone anywhere, only that they weren't biting. She stubbornly insisted, convinced that simply throwing more fish into the water would solve everything. The day of the HOA meeting finally arrived. Alex walked into the community clubhouse, his briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. The room was unusually full. Not just the regular board members, but many residents, including Jake Thompson, Mrs. Schmidt, and some of the forum participants, were there. They sat quietly, their eyes on Brenda, who sat at the head of the table, looking harried but still attempting to project an air of authority. She had no idea the full extent of the trouble she was in. The meeting started with Brenda giving a long, rambling explanation about the unforeseen circumstances of the fishing derby. She spoke about environmental factors and unpredictable fish behavior, avoiding any mention of the community's general unhappiness. She then moved on to the agenda, her voice firm as she called for Alex's appeal. Next on the agenda, she announced, her eyes sweeping over the room before landing on Alex, a hint of disdain in her gaze, is the appeal of Mr. Alex Miller regarding his revoked boat access. She paused, then added, "Mr. Miller, you have 5 minutes to present your case." Alex stood up, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on him. He took a deep breath, his heart thudding against his ribs. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for. He knew Brenda expected him to be just another timid resident she could easily dismiss. But he wasn't. He was armed with facts, legal knowledge, and the silent, growing support of his neighbors. He looked directly at Brenda, his voice clear and steady. "Thank you, Brenda," he began, using her first name, a subtle challenge to her formality. "I am here today to appeal the arbitrary and frankly, illegal revocation of my boat access and the subsequent harassment regarding my boat trailer. He laid out his documents on the table in front of him, methodical and precise. On date of blockage, my boat access was revoked without cause. The reasons provided by Brenda Patterson, a noise complaint, and trailer parking violation, are unsubstantiated and, according to my research into state HOA laws, do not meet the criteria for such a severe penalty. He showed the photo of his perfectly parked trailer, then the illegal towing sticker. This was an unlawful threat to my property. Brenda bristled, her face turning a shade of angry red. Mr. Miller, those are serious accusations. The board makes decisions in the best interest of the community. Do they? Alex countered, holding up a stack of printed papers. I've also gathered evidence of a pattern of arbitrary decision-making and overreach by this HOA, particularly concerning punitive actions against residents. He began to read from the forum posts, recounting the stories of the pink flamingos, the threatened tree, the fines for minor infractions. As he spoke, a murmur rippled through the room. Residents nodded, some exchanging knowing glances. Brenda's face contorted with shock and fury. She looked from Alex to the other board members, who suddenly seemed very interested in their shoes. She had no idea how Alex had gathered all this information, or that her unchecked actions had created such a silent rebellion. She tried to interrupt, but Alex held firm. The spirit of our community is fairness and respect, Brenda, not control through intimidation. My request is not just for my boat access, but for a transparent, just review of how this HOA operates. He finished his 5 minutes, ending with a calm, impactful statement, the silence in the room thick with unspoken tension. Brenda, her face blotchy with rage, slammed her hand on the table, rattling the water glasses. This is an outrage, Mr. Miller. This is completely out of order. You are attacking the very integrity of this board. Her eyes darted around the room, expecting support, but she met only wary faces. The other board members, uncomfortable with the sudden public exposure of Brenda's tactics, looked away. The power she once held so firmly seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand. She had never been challenged so directly, so publicly, and with such overwhelming evidence. She felt completely exposed, and a new, more dangerous emotion began to brew within her, a desperate need for revenge. Brenda Patterson's face was a mask of fury, her eyes blazing as Alex finished his appeal. She had never been so publicly challenged, so thoroughly exposed. The carefully curated image of her absolute authority over Lakeview Estates was crumbling right before her eyes, not just because of Alex's words, but because of the murmuring nods and quiet approvals from the other residents in the room. The other HOA board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding her gaze, clearly rattled by the sudden uprising of resident complaints. This is baseless. Lies. Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. She slammed her palm on the table again, the sound echoing through the tense silence of the room. You are just upset about your boat access, Mr. Miller, and you're trying to stir up trouble. The board stands by its decision. But a new voice, calm and firm, cut through Brenda's outburst. It was Mr. Peterson, the elderly board member who usually remained silent. Brenda, he said, his voice surprisingly steady, Mr. Miller has presented a compelling case. And frankly, the complaints he's brought forward are not new. Many residents have expressed concerns. The recent fishing derby fiasco has only highlighted a deeper issue. Another board member, Mrs. Jenkins, spoke up hesitantly. And the towing sticker, Brenda. That was not authorized by the board. That was an overreach. Brenda spun around, her eyes wide with betrayal. Are you questioning my leadership? After all I've done for this community? We are questioning the process, Brenda, Mr. Peterson replied, his gaze unwavering. And the consequences of that process. The community is unhappy. The lake's fishing problem, it reflects badly on all of us. Alex watched, a silent observer, as Brenda's world fractured. He hadn't said a word about the fish, but the inexplicable mystery of the lake's barrenness hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the HOA's current incompetence. Brenda, desperate to regain control, lashed out, her accusations becoming increasingly wild and personal. "This is all your fault, Mr. Miller. You're ruining Lakeview Estates. I bet you have something to do with the fish, too, you troublemaker." Alex calmly raised a hand. "Brenda, my focus is on my boat access and the unfair treatment. The fishing issue is something else entirely, though it seems to reflect a general lack of control and understanding within the HOA. Perhaps if the board were more focused on genuine community well-building rather than petty power plays, these problems wouldn't arise." His words, though delivered calmly, struck a nerve. The other residents murmured in agreement. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tension. It was Jake Thompson, Alex's neighbor, who stood up from the back of the room. "The fishing problem is real, Brenda. And so are the problems with how this HOA has been run. Alex is right. We need a change." Mrs. Schmidt then stood, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. "Brenda, dear, I've seen the good you've tried to do. But you've lost sight of kindness, and of fairness. This community deserves better." The room erupted into a chorus of agreements. Brenda, overwhelmed by the sudden, unified dissent, shrank back, her face a mixture of shock and utter defeat. The tables had turned, swiftly and decisively. The other board members, seeing the overwhelming support for Alex and the widespread dissatisfaction with Brenda's leadership, made a quick decision. After a hurried, whispered consultation, Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. Given the widespread concerns, and the evidence presented, he announced, his voice carrying surprising authority, the board has decided to immediately reinstate Mr. Miller's boat access. Furthermore, we will be reviewing all recent HOA decisions and beginning a process of reform. And, Brenda, he added, looking directly at her, we believe it's time for a leadership change within the HOA. We will be holding emergency elections for all board positions, effective immediately. Brenda gasped, her jaw dropping. The ultimate humiliation. Not only had she lost her grip on the HOA, but she was being publicly ousted. She stood up, her eyes wide with disbelief, her face contorted in a silent scream of fury. She stormed out of the meeting without another word, her hurried footsteps echoing through the stunned silence. The meeting continued, but with a completely different atmosphere. Alex's boat access was officially reinstated, and the residents, relieved and hopeful, began to discuss a brighter future for Lakeview Estates. Alex felt a surge of triumph, not just for himself, but for the entire community. Kindness and fairness had, in the end, prevailed over pettiness and control. However, the mystery of the fish still remained. It wasn't long after the meeting that Brenda Patterson, consumed by her own downfall, started putting together the pieces. The fishing problem had started exactly when Alex's boat access was revoked. The sudden disappearance of fish from the popular spots. Alex's known love for boats. Her mind, usually so sharp, started connecting dots she had previously dismissed. She remembered Mr. Barnes's strange comment about fish being fed something else or feeling too comfortable elsewhere. She replayed every interaction, every detail, a chilling realization slowly dawning on her. One quiet evening, weeks later, under the cloak of night, Brenda stealthily made her way to Alex's property. She had heard rumors about a hidden path leading to the lake. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for proof, she found the overgrown trail. She crept down it, her heart pounding, until she reached the muddy bank. There, partially hidden in the reeds, was a deflated, well-used inflatable raft. And then, she saw it. Bobbing gently just beneath the surface of the water, a faint, pulsing glow emanating from its depths. One of Alex's discreet, solar-powered underwater lights. Her breath hitched. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The special pellets, the lights, the subtle disorienting of the fish, making them avoid the bait without harm. The reason no one could catch anything. It wasn't magic, or an anomaly, or environmental factors. It was Alex. He hadn't just gotten his boat access back, he had, in a silent, cunning, and completely untraceable way, taken away their fishing rights, the very thing she prided herself on. A guttural cry of pure, unadulterated rage escaped Brenda's lips. She stood there, frozen, staring at the innocent-looking light, a symbol of her utter defeat. The man she had tried to control, to push out, had orchestrated her downfall with nothing more than a few harmless items and a quiet boat. He had done it without breaking a single major HOA rule, without harming anyone or anything, but had inflicted a wound far deeper than any fine or argument. He had exposed her weakness, undone her authority, and completely, utterly, humiliated her. Brenda stood there, trembling, the soft glow of the underwater light mocking her in the darkness. She was left with nothing but her bitter anger and the crushing weight of her lost power. The lake, once her domain, now whispered a silent secret, a testament to Alex's quiet, ingenious revenge. The fish were safe, the community was reformed, and Brenda Patterson, the HOA queen, had finally been dethroned, her reign brought to a wild, unforgettable end by a boat, a hidden path, and a truly extraordinary act of passive defiance.